These are not Rocket Lasso plugins. These are Rocket Lasso plugins. Hello everybody, this is Christian from Rocket Lasso, and in this video we are going to be talking about the very important differences between these nodal tools that you'll find inside your asset browser that were made by Rocket Lasso and the official Rocket Lasso plugins for Cinema 4D. These are completely unrelated things. One is not the other, one was not ported into the other, and I've actually had quite a few people congratulate me saying, hey, it's really cool that you got your plugins inside of Cinema, but that is not what happened. Rocket Lasso was hired to make some brand new tools that are inside of your asset browser, but these do not replace our tools. They are not based off our existing tools. There's no overlapping functionality in our existing tools. These are completely separate and powerful, and some of these were plugin ideas that we had. Very important to note that the best way of supporting Rocket Lasso is to pick up these tools. And what I love so much about that relationship is that we put together a cool tool, something I think should exist. And when you buy it and support Rocket Lasso, we're kind of giving you a new superpower, something that you couldn't do inside of Cinema 4D without it. Having said that, what I'd like to do now is go through every single one of these tools and just give like a 1-minute overview of what that tool does and how it might be useful for you. Now in the future, if there's interest, I would love to make little standalone videos, maybe focusing on every single one of these tools separately. I think I could make 3 hours worth of videos on just the branch spline modifier by itself. And I have made, multiple hours of content just talking about all the ways you can use Slicer or Mesh to Spline. But this is an overview so that you can see exactly what our tools do. So let's get right into it. Let's start out with the Rocket Lasso plugins, and then we will get to the node-based capsules. And we'll start out in the order that they show up here in the store. So here is the Rocket Utility Splines collection. And inside of Cinema, we're inside of 2026. Once you've gotten it and installed it, and you go to drop downs here, you will find an entire folder here of the Rocket Utility Splines. So I can tear that off and we'll step through these. Again, we're going to whip through these as quick as we can because we got lots of tools to talk about. Many Rocket Lasso tools are built around splines, and this is definitely no exception. All of these are modifiers for splines, any type of spline inside of Cinema. So I will create a text spline here. And I've got this nice beefy font. It's a little easier to talk about things. And we'll just go through these in kind of a random order. I'm going to start out with the Rocket Resample. If I create this, you take your spline, any spline or a bunch of splines, you drop it as a child, and it is now resampling. But you can't tell exactly what it's doing. But what you can do is double click on the icon, or there's settings inside, double click. And you can now see a preview of where all the points are getting created now. So inside we have all these different modes. Right now it's in step mode, so I could increase the step, decrease the step, go to any interval. But we got other modes like a count. So now every segment will have exactly, let's say, 300 points. Or I can click to get the average of what all the points were originally. In addition to count, we can go to a random step. So we can say, hey, between 0 and 32, we've got random distributions here. You can twirl this down, get additional settings like randomize the seed, or even this animate. I can type in 5, and now every 5 frames is going to jump to a new random seed and constantly animate this. And then we've got a subdivide, and this is going to take the current number of points, which you'll see at 0. And I can increase it. Scale that up a little bit. I can increase this to 1 or another subdivision. And each time we're getting double the number of previous points because we get a point in between every other one. We keep on subdividing that way. So lots of different things to do just within this tool for resampling a spline parametrically. Now that's going to tie in really well with a bunch of the other tools. Let's yank out the resample, and I'll drop this into a Rocket Smooth. Holding down Alt, it'll become a parent of the object. And now it's getting smooth, but it's going to look pretty crazy. The main setting is iterations. I can drag this and you can see as I drop it down, it's shrinking, but there's very, very few points to work with here. So it looks kind of crazy. So instead, let's subdivide this first. Now we could either put it into a resample, but we also ported that functionality into the smooth. And I can say, actually, I would like a step here. So now I'm subdividing based on steps. Let's double click that. You see the subdivisions. Now, as I add additional iterations here, you can see that it's getting rounded on all the corners. Essentially, we're looking at one point and its neighbor and its neighbor, and it's blending between those. So I can make as many iterations of smoothing as I want. We've got this lovely counter scale setting. I can drag that up. And as I push this, it's going to attempt to maintain sort of the volume of the spline and not pull it in too small, because you'll notice as I add more and more and more and more iterations, everything starts shrinking down. And that tries to counteract it while smoothing things out. And then there's also this stiffness setting, which I can crank up and down, and it'll just transition between the two states. And you can even do that with fields if you want to. I'll remove the stiffness and we'll actually keep this setup to move into the next tool. Let's just do a little bit of rounding there. So you see all these edges look lovely, nice and clean and rounded. But let's move into the Rocket Reduction. I really, really like this tool. So I'm actually going to feed this modifier into this modifier. So we do some reduction. Double clicking on its icon, I can get this preview going, and you see that we've actually removed a whole bunch of points. It's still smoothed out, but all of these subdivision, all these points that were there have now gone away. Now, there's 4 different modes here. They're all cool. They each do different things. But the default mode is my favorite one. It's just called deviation. Currently, we have a tolerance of 1, and that means if any point strays more than 1 centimeter, in this case, away from the line, it has to create a new subdivision for it. So if I start grabbing the tolerance and dropping it further and further down, let's say 0.2, now you're not allowed to deviate more than 0.2 away from the line. And therefore, these areas that were very straight get the points removed, and the areas that are curved get more points assigned to them. So it reduces the number of points. Now, if I go to advanced, I can see that we've now gotten rid of more than 30% of the points that made this up. If we were to increase this amount even further, let's do the deviation of 1. You see there's very, very few points. Go over here, and now you can see we're left with only 26% of the original point count. And depending on how far away you are from your text, you're not going to be able to see a visual difference. Let me turn this on and off. Like, how much difference can you see between those two things? And yet we've eliminated like 80% of the points there. Let's zoom back on in, yank out the smooth, delete out the reduction, and let's talk about the next tool. Actually, the next tool is cleanup. I'm not even going to demo that one. That one's more for like architectural models or complex splines that you bring in from other applications, and there's tons of subdivisions that you don't need. That will remove every single point that you do not need if it's not visually contributing. But let's move to Bezier. And you can see we've got all these points making up this spline. But if I were to make this editable and we go to point mode, you can see that, well, we've kind of obliterated being able to control the shape of this spline. Well, keeping this parametric, I can feed that into the Bezier spline. And if I double click on that icon, you can see we get very different lines here. So what's happening is we are attempting to reduce this down back to a Bezier spline. So you have very few controls inside of here. We tried to keep it as simple as possible. And the main one is tolerance. So just for the example, I'm going to increase the tolerance. As I do, you're going to see that we are, we're losing the shape a little bit more. But as we keep going, let's see, try and find something somewhat reasonable like that. If I were to make this editable, I can now go and grab one of my handles here. And now we've got this nice clean Bezier spline again. So now it's pretty easy to go and make modifications here, where, of course, with all those subdivisions before, that would be almost impossible. So that is our 5 different plugins inside of the utility splines. So let's move on to the next one, which is going to be the Rocket Lasso Slicer plugin. Now, we could work from your basic standard landscape, but it'll be more fun to make a custom one. So I made this text object here, I centered it, and now I'm going to make this plane and deform it with this plane effector being in deformer mode. So we don't need to worry about the specifics there. I've got entire tutorials about doing that for the Slicer plugin. But now if you want to find Slicer, you go to your extensions dropdown, assuming that you've purchased and installed it, and you'll find your Rocket Slicer. Creating that, I can either drop this plane as a child, or even better, I can click to objects mode and now remotely link any geometry. So I can drop that in. I'll say hide the original geometry. And now I'm free to grab the slicer and move it around. And then inside the slicer, increase the number of cuts that we're applying to it. Now you can see we've got this entire stack of cuts going straight through this landscape. So right away, that looks pretty cool. Keeping this short, under geometry, we can actually apply this as a series of flat planes. Let's activate that, and even better, let's turn on a little SSAO. You see these all layer up on top of each other. We can also set this to be extruded, and we have this geometry getting stacked on top of each other. I can increase the thickness of that as much as I like. And we've got this landscape mode, which will actually alternate every other layer. Under the Slicer tab, if we go to our drop down here, I can actually grab the spacing and I can squish all of these down so they all layer up directly on top of each other. And you can see this crazy outlined look that would be pretty impossible to make any other way. And there's so many additional things that you can do with the slicer. Here we have this set up all nice and clean and parametric. Let's go back to returning as a spline, and let's keep the geometry getting spread out. I hit R for rotate, and I could spin this and get some cuts at this angle. You see the entire thing sliced over from there. I have a bunch of different videos explaining this tool, but it's great to be able to create this parametric spline and create slices of landscapes and any bit of geometry that you have. Moving right along, let's go to Mesh to Spline. I like this one. Very practical. I've got a text object here, it just says mesh. Under extensions, we'll grab our Rocket Mesh to Spline, and we can either remotely link or drop directly as a child inside there, and it's going to take any geometry and convert it to a parametric spline. So I can spin around. You see we've got this lovely spline here. Now, my favorite setting inside of Mesh to Spline is just this nice simple threshold, where if any edge is kind of a soft curve, we can start erasing that out. And now you can see that that looks just as clean as all the other ones, in spite of all the extra polygons that would make it up. So with just a single slider, we can completely change the way that that looked. And of course, these are splines now, so we can do anything we like with those. We could be sweeping these, we could be extruding them, we can use these for lofts. I've done things where I needed to animate the eyebrow of a character, and it's really hard to stick one mesh onto another. So I can just create a selection of the character's eyebrow edges and then turn into a line and then do a sweep on top of them. There's so many different ways of using this tool, and there's so many ways of combining this with a bunch of the capsules we're going to be talking about later. But for now, we have a couple other modes inside this tool. Like right now, inside of edge mode, we could do edge to spline or explode every edge. And if I do an offset, you'll see that these will all push out from where they are originating. But if we go to polygon mode, you see as I do this offset, we can push all of these edges out, and they're sort of outlining the individual polygons or n-gons that make it up. So a completely different look there. And then if we grab some sort of organic shape, we'll keep it simple and just make a sphere here. I'll drop that inside, and let's set this to outline mode and even increase that. Actually, let's make a copy so we can see that as well. You now see I've got the circle around the sphere, but this is being generated by whatever polygons, whatever edges were just on this border. So I can actually rotate my camera around, and you see that is getting outlined. Combining this with a sweep or using Redshift to render these splines, you can create so many cool Sketch and Tool-like looking effects. But we've got a lot of tools to talk about, so let's move to the next one, which is Ricochet. This one is super fun. Moving back to cinema, I've got a text object inside of a volume builder, inside a volume mesher. Let's go into the extensions dropdown, grab myself a Ricochet, and let's move this around. You can think of this kind of like a laser, kind of like you're shooting a laser and everything is a mirror. So if I were to say, okay, Ricochet, I want you to link to an object, and that will be this mesh, you'll see suddenly that this little laser line, if I start rotating this around, you see it's shooting it like a laser and it's ricocheting off of it. Let's do my favorite thing and move this inside of the object. And then inside of Ricochet, I can hit hide sources, and now we just see the line bouncing around inside of it. If I were to grab this length and start increasing it, you see it's bouncing and bouncing and bouncing around the inside, like a laser would bounce around inside of a, kind of like inside a disco ball or something. But what's cool here is now we've got a length of 10,000. But what if we do a length of 100,000? What if we do a length of 1,000,000? You see, we got so many bounces happening, and it calculated super duper quick that this looks like a solid orange object. But if I start zooming in, you can see it's just a bunch of splines bouncing around all over the place. Now let's bring this back to being reasonable and make something a little bit fun. Maybe we'll go back to, let's do 100,000. That seems like a pretty good number of bounces. And let's use a utility spline. We'll combine this for the first time here. I'll feed this spline into a Rocket Smooth. So holding down Alt, that gets fed inside and smoothing it all out. But I want to subdivide it. So under my point input, I will say step. So now double clicking on the icon, you can see that I've got all these subdivisions that are making it up. So I don't want to smooth too much. Let's do 1 or 2 iterations just to take off the edges there. So now we've got this even distribution of points along the entire thing. So that sets us up really well for, let's hide this geometry, sets us up well for right-clicking and saying that this is going to be a simulation rope. Let's make a thickness of, let's just guess, about 3, and we'll feed this into a sweep with an end side with the radius of 3. So hopefully the simulation will work here where it wants to push all these lines apart from each other. Then let's make the mesh here a collider. So simulation, collider, and I'll say don't collide with the outside, instead do the inside of the object. And then Control D or Command D, go to simulation, scene, and then say gravity 0. So there's no gravity. So now this might be a little overstuffed, but let's hit play. and give that a second because they're all interconnecting or intersecting each other. And now suddenly they push out and it's filling up this entire volume. Look how easy that was for me to fill up this entire thing and then run a simulation on top of it, perfectly filling this entire thing up, be it noodles or brains or just any kind of weird, crazy effect that you want to do. This is all full. Now let's push it a little bit further. You see we're getting all these spikes, and that just happens in Cinema 4D. If you have a really sharp line inside of a sweep, you get these kind of sharp, jagged edges coming out. Now there's a setting inside of Ricochet to help compensate, but we're running a simulation after that, so that doesn't work. But what I can do is take the result of this simulation and let's feed it into another smooth. So I'm going to say utility splines smooth, and now it's smoothing those out. But what I'd like to do is maybe change this to subdivide mode. So now I'm putting extra subdivision in between each section. So now as I increase the iterations of smoothing, suddenly those edges get rounded out. And because we subdivided a little bit extra, that means these are not really getting out of shape. They're still doing a really good job of avoiding each other. So I'll do 4 iterations there. I'll grab this N side, increase it to be 8 sides to make that look a little more rounded. NA, I'll even turn on a little SSAO. And then you can see all these look beautiful here, working so nicely. And this smooth is actually happening after the simulation. It's a post effect on top of it. So along those lines, I could show you that we can grab the smooth and we get all these extra points here that maybe we don't need. I can feed that under extensions, utility splines, and we'll do another reduction, just like earlier, with a deviation. And now you see I've dramatically reduced the number of points here, but we still have that final shape that we wanted. Let's grab the tolerance and drop it, still pretty high. Let's do like 0.2. So you can see where it's curvy, we still have lots of subdivisions, but these smooth areas, there's very few. So under advanced, you can see I've gotten rid of almost exactly half of the points, but visually from here, it doesn't look any different. So that is the power of starting to combine these tools on top of each other. Now, this is mostly talking about Ricochet, but there are so many additional things that we could do with that as far as like adopting the angle of the surface or wrapping an object around from the outside or creating multiple ones that are bouncing all over the place, creating web looking effects. There's so many different cool things you can do on Ricochet. So I suggest you go and check out the full videos for that one. Let's check out the next tool, which is going to be Recall. There are a bunch of practical ways of using Recall, but let me just show you a couple of quick ones. Here's another default text object, and let's say we made a change. I'm gonna put a little exclamation mark on there, and I want to store the state of that. Well, after you have Recall installed, I can right click, go to extensions, grab Recall, and there's all these settings down here, but for the most part, you don't even have to worry about those. 95% of the time, all you have to do is create the Recall tag and double click. I have now stored the state of this object. So the simplest version would be I can just type in something, and then later I can be doing a bunch of different stuff in my project and working on different projects, coming back over, save the file, close this file. I come back and being like, oh, I didn't want to make that change. I can just double click on that tag and it's going to jump back to whatever state it was when we stored it. Let's push this a little bit further and start layering this up a bunch of times. So let's feed this into, let's do a volume builder, feed that into a volume mesher, and I'll move my tag up and I'll make a duplicate of the tag holding down Control or Command. And if I hold down Control and I double click the icon again, it's going to record a brand new state. Essentially, I clicked the override button. You see it made a new color indicating that it did indeed refresh somehow. So now I can say, well, actually I want to go back to text. Okay, just the text. Nope, I want to go back to the state when we are already inside the volume mesher, and we jump back there. Let's push it further. Let's grab another slicer, because why not? I'll face this along Z and say I want a single slice, and I'll feed this into that. And now you can see my slicer is slicing out the result of that. Inside of the slicer, I'll say, hey, give me a smooth layer or two, make that nice and rounded. I'll move both tags up, and let's make another copy, double click, and store that. And then let's take this one and feed that into, actually, let's just layer them up a few times. I'll make a copy of that volume mesher, drop this inside, and now a little more detail on that. We'll say that that's going to get smoother, and we'll make this line a little bit thinner and subdivide a little more often, make that more skinny. There we go. Something like that. We don't need to go too crazy. So we got this shape, and I'll make another copy. Oops, I accidentally double clicked there. So I can just hit undo, and you see that did recover. And I'll make a copy, hold down Control, double click, and now you can see I've got 4 different tags. And at any point I could go back and be like, oh, dang, I want to go back and I need that. I need some original change or something I broke or something I made editable. In fact, that's the last step I like doing. Why don't we make this editable? I'll make a null, and let's rescue these tags off of there, and then make this editable and put them back on the top. And then let's store the state of that. So now we've got all these states. So later we're working. And then I'm like, oh, dang, I want to go back to the parametric version of this. Well, I stored the state here. So I can double click and I'm back to the parametric version. And be like, no, I didn't need that one. I can double click and jump back to the one where I made it editable, or jump back and get just the text. So we can store the state of these and they just get stored essentially as a copy inside of Cinema. And this makes it easy to bring them back or recall them back very easily. Another way I really enjoy using this tool is on cameras. If I were to make a camera here and I link to it, I can right click and add a brand new extensions or recall tag and double click and store it. But now I can move to another POV, like let's say right here. And, for the client, they're going to want a couple different angles, and I'm modeling it and I want to jump back to a previous state. So let's make a copy of that one, store it. And I'm like, well, I want to jump back to where I used to be. So I can double click here and know that's going to jump back, not just to the position, but to the position, rotation, scale, modeling, any tags, any hierarchy, everything that it has, it's going to go back to that state. So here, essentially, I'm free to go working on my object and be like, okay, I'm modeling and I grab here and I need to grab the mesh and, make some changes to this thing, extrude. And then I'm like, okay, go back to the original camera angle. I can just double click and I'm back to that original stored camera angle. So just a couple of tiny ways of using recall. Keep in mind, we did not change any settings inside here. We've got notes and additional ways of storing information and naming and changing the colors of the tags, having lots of control. We didn't talk about any of that. We just talked about the super duper basics. So definitely check out the training for that one as well. The next tool we're going to talk about is going to be actually just the Rocket Lasso Gemstone Collection. When you pick that up, you're essentially going to get a series of models and cool materials and a big elaborate tutorial explaining how to use all of them. But essentially, I spent some time just for fun modeling out a bunch of gemstones and I wanted people to get access to them. So I stored them inside the asset browser here. I made a custom one here, but I can go to models, I can go to these gemstones, and here's all these different gems that should be pretty dang accurate. So I've got like this diamond, and we got emeralds and pear cuts and radiant cuts. And if I zoom on up, you can see we've got this lovely diamond just ready to use. Super clean geometry. I didn't make any assumptions. There's no bevels or anything. You do all that parametrically yourself after the fact. So yeah, that is the Rocket Lasso Gemstone Collection. Check it out. Back to the store, the next thing is actually a bundle where you get all the spline tools we just talked about, but in one collection, you get 30% off. But the next actual proper tool is actually going to be Field Driver, which you can think of as both the tag that does the driving and then 6 different brand new fields inside of Cinema. And of course, there's a bundle to get all 7 combined. Jumping back into Cinema, I've got a basic cloner and simulation tag set up. I can play and it's going to explode out a bunch of spheres. So just for fun, let's add in a random tag here. And I want to let's get some random scale going. I'll even animate them a little bit. I'll say noise, indexed, have go relatively slow. It won't control position. Instead, we'll do scale, uniform, absolute, and we'll say -1. So they can get really, really tiny. So if I hit play, you're going to see that they're all moving and scaling slightly. But let's say I wanted to get some cool oscillation going here. I can grab the effector tab and we've got the strength. I'm going to right click and say add an extensions field driver tag. I can click on random, grab the strength, drop it onto that tag, and now I am controlling that parameter. I'm going to say I want to go from 0 to 100, and currently it's being controlled by a custom Rocket Lasso timer. So this is a timer field. Selecting the timer field, you can see that you're saying over the time from 0 to 30, I want it to go from 0 to 100. We can modify the spline. We've got all these cool presets. I'm going to say ease in, ease out. Let's drop this down to 15, and currently it's set to loop forever. So let me see what happens when I hit play. Now when I hit play, you can see suddenly they're pulsing, boom, 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 every 15 frames. You can see that we've got this lovely little widget here that's giving you some feedback as to what is being controlled on the tag that you currently have selected. We can do things like say yo-yo, and now it's getting big, small, big, small. We can have this get way more extreme. I can drop this to a shorter time, just say 5, and now suddenly like really rapidly, bam, bam, bam. So we have a lot of options to combine any parameter inside of C4D and drive it with any field. Now, it's important to note that 2 months after we came out with our field driver, completely coincidentally, Maxon came out with their own field driver named the same thing, which was insane coincidence. But right-clicking, you can go to the Maxon version, going under animation tags, and you say field driver, and it will do similar things. We actually have a lot more controls to control ours, and I like our interface a lot better. But theirs does work through a cloner, and ours only works kind of on top of a cloner. So that's an important distinction to make. But regardless of that, the 6 new fields that were made by Rocket Lasso work in both our field driver and the Maxon one. So even if you don't need our field driver, getting our custom fields are really, really powerful. So I'll delete out the Maxon one for now. And let's take a quick look at a couple of the fields here. So hitting play, you see we still got this thing pulsing, going big and small. Now, what I think I would like to do is let's go and modify the color of these cloners somehow. So how do we want to do this? I'm going to say it's just a plane effector, a simple old plane effector, and it's not going to affect the position. Instead, we'll just control it via the field's color. So inside of the fields, I will do something like make a rocket timer. So here's a timer. It's outputting the color, and it's going to do the color how? Well, let's give it a color remap. And inside, I'll say, give it a gradient. So this timer, using that same type of time that I showed you before, we can just feed through whatever colors we like. So I'll drop this through, and let's grab something kind of neon. So I'll grab neon right here, nice simple neon. So we've got these colors, and we're shifting through them. Now, we've got a brand new timer. You see it's looping through. We could say yo-yo, so that goes up, down, up, down. That looks a little bit nicer on here. But okay, so cool. We're controlling colors now using a timer. We could loop it. We could have it be additive. We have all these different shapes. But let's go inside of the plane effector and look at some of our other modifiers. So actually, let me just show you that under the field objects, there's a new rocket field driver link, a new rocket noise, a rocket timer, which we've been talking about. And then under the modifiers, you're going to see that we've got a rocket hue, saturation, brightness, a rocket stop motion, and a rocket weight. Let me show you the hue, saturation, and brightness. Clicking on that, we'll say it's only modifying the colors, and we can do all sorts of cool, crazy things. Let me pause it so it's not constantly refreshing here. And we can do things like drag the saturation down. We can increase the saturation and make it super duper vibrant. Like, I can't believe this didn't already exist inside of Cinema. We can grab the brightness and we can pull down saturation, say it's extra bright. We can drop it down and make it all the way down to black, and we can shift the hue around to any color that we like. And I'm not going to get into it, but we could use field driver to drive the hue to have this be looping around and around and around, creating lots of different colors as well. I can also click on base hue, and this is going to always return the most saturated possible version of the color no matter what. So you see, this is now, even though I said neon colors, it's now super duper saturated on top of it. Now, why don't I grab my timer and I'll speed this up a whole bunch. So let's say it's going to only take 15 frames to do this. So then here's another modifier I've got. We've got the stop motion, and I really like this one. If I grab my stop motion, and keep in mind, we're just observing the colors right now. I'm going to say I want you to only update every 5th frame. Why don't we calm this down? That's a little epilepsy warning, just let's throw that out there. So let me lower this down to, or let's do like 7. So now it's a little bit more random and slower. And now you see it's only updating every once in a while. Let's grab the timer and push that up a little bit longer. Let's say like 75 frames. So it's more slowly transitioning through. Let's say only update every 16th frame or so. So now you see it's slowly snapping to each of these colors. We got things like variation. I could say add indexed based variation. I'll say up to 15. And now you see that each of them is offset from each other, snapping to a new color. Now the stop motion is not just for color. This is for any sort of motion on top of any regular cloner setup. This is just not for field drivers. It's for anything inside of MoGraph. So stop motion, awesome. Hue, saturation, brightness, the timer are random. So many different ways of using field driver. It's just a fun animation tool that keeps things clean and parametric with no keyframes. So I definitely have a bunch of training on that one, and you should totally check it out. Moving into the final official Rocket Lasso plugin for now, we've got our Voxel Mesher, our newest plugin. Back in the Cinema, I'm inside the asset browser, and under models, characters, we got this purple shirted guy. I'm gonna double click on that, pop him into the scene, zoom on up, and there he is. Glorious. Inside the extensions dropdown, we've got our Rocket Voxel Mesher. Holding down Alt that will automatically be fed into the Voxel Mesher, but you'll see nothing changed. And that's because the Voxel Mesher works off of the built-in volume builder inside of Cinema. So if you didn't make it yourself, there's a button that says Create Volume Builder. And as soon as I do, we are going to get a pixelated version of that character. Moving into the Volume Builder, I can keep on decreasing the voxel size and therefore increase the resolution. Let's do like 2.5. And now we can see that character coming through here as voxels. Now, currently, this is just the outer shell of the character. Now, the reason I chose this character is he came with a material already. If I go to my Voxel Mesher and we go down to this Vertex Color Map checkbox, this will automatically enable us to feed through any kind of procedural or image-based shader. So under shader, I'm going to go to bitmaps, and here we find the purple shirt that the character is already wearing. As soon as I click on that, you're going to see our voxels get colorized by that material. So now we've automatically got him colorized. Very cool. Now, this is just an outer shell of the character, so he's hollow. But we've got other modes here like cube. If I were to select the cube, it doesn't look any different, but suddenly he's actually made up of cubes. So if I grab my rescale geometry and I say minus 0.3, you see those all shrink, and now we've got these full little cubes that are making up the character. Alternatively, let's get rid of that. I can say go to polygon, and now we're returning these flat sheets of polygons that are still returning the color. Kind of an interesting one. And then we've got our very important mode, which is just point. And now you see I have, as long as I have it selected, a point cloud that's getting colorized just like the character. Now, the reason this is very powerful is we can now work with cloners with it. Actually, if I were to go back inside and say cube mode, all I have to do is go down and click Convert to Cloner, and it's going to do a bunch of things automatically for us. As soon as I click on that, you'll see a Voxel Mesher is now in point mode. And then there's now a cloner with a cube. The cube automatically scaled, the cloner automatically scaled, and a plane effector that is set to look at the shader color of the vertex map. So now we're in clone land. Now that we're in clone land here, I can grab this cube and do things like turn on a fillet there, get that character rounded out. Let's make that small, 8.2, get a little bit of rounding on there, change this to any material that we like. Let's go back and actually let's delete that out and create a sphere instead. Drop that inside and do, I don't know, what is it going to be, 0.125? Oh, 1.25. There we go. And that is now scaling perfectly on the character, taking on the colors of the character. And then we could do things like run simulation on this. Let's right click and add a bullet rigid body. Shift C, type in the word floor, make one of those, copy that onto that. And now all these spheres are here on the character. I can hit play, and now it's going to simulate the entire character with the colors applied, just collapsing into the ground as a puddle of spheres. So the Voxel Mesher is very fun, not just at making cubes, but by kind of taking the entire space and decomposing it into whatever shape you want it to be. So as always, we've got a whole giant tutorial series on using this to its fullest extent. So definitely go and check that out as well. That concludes the plugin portion of this video. Now we're going to move into the capsule portion of this video. So everything you've seen this far, those are all code-based, they're all C++. We spent a whole bunch of time coding them. We've got hundreds of thousands of lines of code making up all of those tools. And you buy those at rocketlasso.com. So, that's fun. That's how you can support us. But we worked with Maxon to develop a whole series of capsules, and let's go and track those down. Let's close, actually just delete out all that stuff and move on into the assets browser. If we click on auto here and I search for the word Rocket Lasso, and let's shrink these down a hair, you're going to see a whole bunch of different stuff pop up. And what you've got here is a whole bunch of different example files that are all showing off the capsules that we've made. And then at the bottom, we have the actual tools. Let me click on just the nodes tab here, and now you see just the tools. A couple of important things to note here. Let's make those a little bit bigger just for fun. So almost all of these are now available just in your Cinema 4D copy. So if you got a C4D subscription, you've now got these inside. There, I think, are 2 exceptions. I think the Ivy generator is not there, and maybe the picture frame generator apparently is not in there, but I think everything else is now available. Now, I do want to spend a little bit of time just talking about the kind of concept of these. These are not C++. These are built from nodes. Let me just show you. If I were to pop open any one of these, here's the branch spline modifier. Technically, you can right click on that and you can say edit asset as group. And now you're actually inside of that tool. And if I were to zoom up, you can see we've got all these controls and all of these parameters. And if you move inside, you see this is built out of all of these nodes. And if I move inside, it's built out of more nodes. And if I zoom inside, it's built out of more nodes. And maybe, yeah, I think that might be the deepest that particular one goes. And you see how many nodes there are making this up. Actually, there are more groups in here. So like it just keeps on going deeper and deeper. There's so much math and crazy stuff going on inside of these. But these are not C++. And these are not things that we sell. These are just included inside of Cinema 4D or your Maxon 1 collection. And I just want to make this really clear to everybody because there has been a lot of confusion about that. Now, I am very proud of these tools. We made some really cool stuff. And a lot of these, as far as I'm concerned, are almost full-on plug-in style or plug-in quality. And, Rocket Lasso goes really hard into trying to make these things high quality. And a bunch of these ideas were actually ideas I had on my list of plugins to make, but we made them as capsules to be available for everybody. Couple of other little important things of note. We've got this interconnect, which is one of my favorites, and we've got this picture frame. Those are accidentally right now not tagged Rocket Lasso. So if you search Rocket Lasso, you will not find those, but you can search for interconnect and you can search for picture viewer. I just manually added it here for the tutorial so you could see all of them. And the other thing to note is, yes, these are capsules, but a lot of you have probably interacted with them just by clicking on the deformers dropdown. And inside you see that we've got 6 of them just put right there. And there's a partition modifier, which is another one of ours. And they're just right here in the menu. So you might not have even realized that these were capsules, that these were coded with nodes by Rocket Lasso. But anyway, we're going to step through every single one of them, just like we did with the plugins. I'm going to try and keep it simple and quick, but hey, some of these are pretty elaborate. To begin with, let's talk about the branch spline modifier. Double clicking on that, let's hide the assets browser. You'll see it's called the branch spline modifier, and that's because it needs a spline to modify. Now, you could put this on any spline. You could put it on Ricochet. You could put it on Mesh to Spline. You could put it on just a text primitive. But let's just make a basic tree. It's fun to make a nice basic plant here. So if you click on this dropdown, you'll see that there's a new line primitive. This is actually also a capsule. And I'll say just aim up on Y, and we'll make it a little bit taller at 333. Zooming on out, you see nice big line. If you wanted, we can make a character here just for a little scale reference. I like doing that. So now we got a spline. I can drop the spline modifier, the branch spline modifier, as a child, and suddenly it kind of looks like a feather here. I could increase the count. We could decrease the count, but let's make it look like a tree. So I'm thinking let's decrease the count to maybe like 6. And I want to start higher up on the spline. So I'll scoot that up. And then right now the length is absolute. They're all the exact same length. But I'm going to say actually it's a relative size. And we'll drop that down to about 75%. We could add some length variation on there. So they're different lengths. And then let's move down to initial direction. And under initial direction, you can see we've got this angle offset. So you can see we can tilt it down, lay them flat out. Oh, so many cool things we can do here. But I want some angle variation and I want a lot of roll variation. So now they're spinning on every possible angle here. And then we can move to the direction tab. And there's 2 really cool settings here for angle variation and roll variation. If I increase these, you can see essentially they're getting all wobbly. And we've got some organicness to these branches. So, okay, basic branches on the spline, nothing too crazy. But where it gets crazy powerful is that we can now take this branch spline modifier and duplicate it. Now there's a second layer. So now our branches have branches. So now let's say our branches, and instantly we're starting to get a crazy complex tree just by layering these up. And what's cool is I can just grab all 3 of them and make universal changes. If I wanted the branches to be a little bit shorter, let's go back to our object tab and say that the relative length is going to be shorter. We can add more randomness so we get some smaller branches or some larger ones. We can say we don't want quite as many of these branches, or maybe we want some more of those branches spreading out. Under direction, we could make these really gnarly and twisted by increasing these roll variations and the angle variation. And you see how twisted it gets. Or we can say, oh, actually, we're going to get rid of those entirely. And now they're all perfectly straight, making a completely different looking style. Let's add a little bit of variation back in again. And we got other settings like gravity, which, a lot of these settings are surprisingly coherent. You see, as I drag this, that there's very little popping going on there. We've also got the same thing with gravity. I can start increasing gravity and the branches are going to pull downward, and we keep going and going and going. You see all the branches just drooping down. Keep in mind, I'm changing all 3 at the same time, but I could change just one layer. Like the first layer branches could want to go up and the leaves want to droop down. So, always layer these up. We can also do negative gravity. So pull is negative, and now everything wants to pull upward. And you can make so many, essentially, any plant you look at, I think you can make it with branch spline modifier. There's so many crazy ways of combining this. Now, I'll probably end up doing this quite a few times, but you can go into the asset browser, and if you go to all, and you search Rocket Lasso, you see these examples. So here's 3 example files for the branch spline modifier. And just opening this one up, you can see that here I am using it in a very mechanical way instead of the nice organic way you just saw, where here's almost like this Triforce mobile. And over here, almost like this crazy bracket. Here's a 2-dimensional tree if you do the settings correctly. And here's that same tree, but with dimension, where these all spun around. So many crazy ways of combining these. And then we've got this branch spline modifier example making a rose bush. I found these roses in the asset browser, and I was like, I'm going to rebuild it, but using branch spline modifier. So not counting the actual flowers, these roses, everything else is branch spline modifier, including the leaves. And it's entirely parametric. So I can go in at any point and say, I want more, I want less. Let's drop the countdown. You can see I'm parametrically making fewer or more. We change the length of everything. We could say that these are going to be like longer roses, and everything propagates through the system. And I've got gigantic rose bush. So any plant you look at, I think you could make with the branch spline modifier. I absolutely love this tool. And one day I've got a couple upgrades to it I would love to be able to add in if Maxon is ever interested. Close that one down, and let's delete everything out. And let's go back to nodes and look at the next one, which is going to be our break spline modifier. But you know what? We're going to combine that directly with the catenary spline modifier, because these two complement each other really well. Let's start out super duper basic and just make, actually, I'll just make a line. So here's that same line again. Let's zoom on up, and I'll say center the line so we can see a little bit better, make it a little bit longer. And if I were to grab the catenary spline and I drop it as a child, suddenly you're going to see this line is sagging down. What the catenary is going to do is find every single point and arc a line in between them. There's another mode that's actually per segment, which in this case will look identical, but you can see this line is sagging down. I can grab the sag and I can pull it down. We can go negative and pull it up, but it's going to make everything look nice and droopy here. Now this combines really well. I'll turn that off. It combines really well with our break spline modifier. If I drop that in as a modifier in the line, you're going to see suddenly we got all these little breaks in between. So with that in mind, if I were to grab the catenary and activate it again, suddenly, let's give it some sag. You're going to see that every one of those segments is sagging down. We can now add variation. You see that they have different lengths. We can add some bias to put a little more contrast in there. Inside the break spline modifier, we currently have a count, but I can grab this randomness and say, well, make them be random lengths. And then you see this one line is drooping down and breaking in different spots. Now, inside the break spline, we've got this gap. We can put more spaces in between them. We could say that there's no space in between them, and now you see them all lined up nicely. You can even layer these things up in crazier ways where maybe, let's turn that off, and I'll make a duplicate of the catenary. So that is a catenary. I'm going to say, okay, now it's drooping down. Let's calm it down a little bit. And then I'll break it. And let's put the gap back in the break so you can actually see it. So you see there's now these breaks inside of this arced spline. And then I'm going to say now arc or catenary down each of those segments. And then you see I have an arc spline that breaks and then arcs down, and we can layer and layer and layer these. And in this case, I could duplicate that, delete out these last two. And now you see I've got lines hanging off a line. So even just those two tools combine in a crazy amount of ways. But of course, there's always more. Just keeping it real clean and simple, I can grab the text spline here. And another thing I love about the break spline is we can drop this inside of a text spline, or of course, any of those Rocket Lasso tools. And I can set this to angle mode instead. And now anywhere we have a sharp angle, it's going to break it at the corner. So now all of these have become separate segments that we can do whatever we want with. So opens up a lot of kind of cool, crazy possibilities here. So yeah, love the break spline modifier. Catenary spline modifier is great for what it does. But we got a lot more tools to do, so let's delete everything out. And now let's make the Constellation Generator. Hide the asset browser because I think we'll need the room. Now, notice I said generator and not modifier. And that's because this is a generator, much like the stuff in this menu is a generator. So let's start out super basic. I'll just create a sphere. And let's visually hide that in the object manager. And inside Constellation, let's link it as the point source. And you're going to see something that maybe looks a little bit like the atom array, but it's actually very different. What this is doing is detecting the distance from one point to its neighboring points and making a connection. So everywhere there's a point, we now get a sphere, and in between each one, we're going to get a cylinder. Selecting the constellation, The main parameter you want to worry about here is our search distance. So as I zoom out, you can see that there definitely is more going on up on the top. If I select it, and actually I'm going to lock this because visually the highlight is really messing up the effect. Now, if I start increasing my search distance, you're going to see more and more connections are being made. If I shrink our search distance, fewer and fewer connections are being made until they all disappear. So pretty cool, kind of out of the box, making some nice effects there. But under points, we do things like increase our point radius. We can increase the cylinder that's connecting these things, but we can feed any shape in as a child here and control what these are being made out of. So if I were to make a cube and drop that in as a child of the constellation, you're going to see that these are now being connected via cubes. We can drop in any shape that we like there. Actually, I think cone shapes, those work really well inside there. So drop a cone in there, set that cone to be on Z plus. Ooh, let's unlock, always important. Let's say that's now on Z plus, and then you see that there's a cone interconnecting between the two of them. There are so many settings that make up this tool that we definitely cannot go into all of them, but it's definitely worth showing that if we delete out that sphere and instead we make a particle system, so under simulate, we will make an emitter, basic emitter. Let me switch this over to, actually, we'll leave it rectangle, and let's make a big heavy turbulence. So forces, turbulence, I'll give it a decent amount of scale and a pretty decent amount of strength. And if we hit play, we should see some particles start going all crazy like. So now let's grab our constellation and link the particle group, not the emitter, the group. And suddenly we're going to get a bunch of cool connections in between them. So it's kind of like an atom array, but like so much more control. So let me deselect that just because everything's kind of big right now. Why don't I select constellation and we will increase some radiuses here. So we'll make those bigger. We'll make the connections bigger, and we'll go to color and I can feed in a custom gradient here. So let's say that that's going to be more of a soft kind of neon rainbow there. So if I play, you see we've got all this animation of these growing and drifting apart. And those connections will fade in as points are close to each other, and they'll fade out as they move away. So much more to this tool, but when it comes to any of these tools inside of the assets browser, I've got an entire video on Cineversity explaining how to use every single button. So definitely go and check those out. So much more we could talk about on this constellation, but I think we'll have to wrap that one up there. So let's delete all that out and move on into the dash spline modifier. This one, incredibly straightforward, but I really like what it does. We'll make another text spline, spin around to the proper side, and double click on the dash spline modifier and drop it as a child. And look, we have a dashed line. Pretty straightforward, but there's a couple cool settings here. For instance, let's set a nice slow rate here and hit play. And these lines, okay, a little too slow. These are now animating along the entire spline. Another one that I really like is we can go under custom and we can add a bunch of different checkboxes here and essentially draw out a custom pattern. So you can see it's on, off, on, off. And now you get that pattern represented. So a parametric way of creating a bunch of dash splines onto any spline inside of Cinema. Let's delete that one out and talk about my other favorite capsule. It's kind of tied between the branch spline modifier and the electric spline modifier, although Interconnect's getting up there too as well. But electric spline, I absolutely love this one. So in order to use it, why don't we go and bring back the text object here? And I'm going to use Rocket Lasso's Mesh to Spline, so my plugin again. And here we've got this text object, and I'm going to say explode every single edge, and let's add in some threshold here. So there we go. Now we've got that text object. Now, double clicking on the electric spline and hiding that away, we can take the electric spline modifier and drop it as a child of this, and suddenly the entire thing is made out of electricity. Now, I don't want to go and get all technical on you, but what's cool here is that these are not spatially dependent. It's based on the index of the point. So the cool thing there is I can grab this and move it around the scene, and it's not going to be popping the animation. It's coherent as you move it, unlike if you were to use some sort of displacement. So that's a big advantage here. Now, there is so much that we can do with this tool. It's absolutely insane. Now, this is just basic electricity here. Now we can calm it way down, just get like a little bit of electricity, like nice and gentle there on top of this meshless spline. And we can make, if I copy this text object out, suddenly we got like an electric looking bit of text there. But let's push this further where maybe we don't want this to just be electricity. I can click on the electric spline modifier and change it to a different noise type. Let's say it's going to be a purlin noise. And suddenly we got these big smooth lines going on. Now we could make this look like scribbly looking text by increasing my noise frequency. So we go more and more and more and more and more and more and more. And now this purlin noise is like really, kind of detailed. And suddenly we get these scribbles. And I could grab the animation speed, which is right here. I can crank that way up, and now suddenly it's really scribbly looking. Or I could zero out the animation speed, and we've got something called animate. And I can say every 5 frames, refresh the seed, and suddenly we get kind of this stop motion-y looking pop. Now that also works well on top of this animation, where it's like every couple of frames, the electricity kind of gets like a refresh, which definitely is an effect you can kind of get with electricity. Let's turn off that refreshing though. So I'll say stop animating every 5 frames. We can also do things like say, don't animate that. Instead, have it animate along the spline. So let's say 555. Oop, way too fast. 55. And now you see it's actually traveling along the length of the spline. But where I really end up using this quite a bit is for sketch and tune like effects on top of other things. Now, Redshift does have some cool non-photo real rendering, but doesn't quite have sketch and tune style lines. But if you combine Rocket Lasso's Mesh to Spline along with the electric spline modifier, we can do things like grab this Perlin noise, and I'll put a relatively low noise frequency on there, and we'll really pull back on displacement, just like a little bit. And now we can bring back this text, and now I can hit play, and we get these lines wiggling around. Let's feed this spline into a sweep, feed that into a end side, and let's scale that way down, T for scale, and set this to, actually, I will set my entire display rather, to constant shading. So everything gets flattened out. And then let's set our sweep, the display color, to be automatic, and I'll set that to black. And suddenly, look at this, we've got some sketchy lines on top of our text. With my mesh to spline, I'll say I want to offset everything away from the surface just a little bit. And now I've got this scribbly looking text on the outside right here in the viewport. We can change this electric spline to be animating however we want. Let's change the speed. Let's go a little bit faster and not travel along. Let's crank this up even more. So now we get all this little jittery text. But then what makes the electric spline really, really cool, besides doing these sketch and tune looking effects, is layering them on top of each other. So in this case, let's go back to doing electricity type look. Let's say I want to push these like way out again, these electrical lines. I'll slow it back down again. So we get these big, let's move them real slow. Like, there we go. It's nice, slow electrical lines, but they don't look like electricity. They look like little scribbles. But now let's grab another electric spline modifier and layer it on top of itself. And on this one, let's say that there's very little displacement, just like a little bit. Let's make this a little bit skinnier. Maybe we'll invert the colors here. Let's make this kind of a bright yellow. So it's kind of standing out like electricity there. So now you see we get these big, slow lines moving around, and have a tiny one that's then adding the electrical effect on top of the big, swoopy lines. So layering these things on top of each other, that's where so much of the power comes in. So yeah, absolutely love the electric spline modifier. Again, I have a full video on Cineversity on how to use it. There are a bunch of additional parameters, more things we can do. There's like ways of cloning it. Like right now I can grab this and say clone multiple lines. So you see that each one has got 3 lines generating the electricity. So yeah, definitely go and check out more about this one. Definitely one of my favorites. Delete all that out, back into the assets browser. Next up is actually one of the very first ones we ever made. It is the Fui Graph Spline. Now this one is a spline primitive. If you create it, this is supposed to create almost every type of bar graphy looking thing that you can possibly imagine. If you hit play, it's automatically animated. We got all these different segments that are making it up. We can increase or decrease the count of these segments. But the cool thing here is all the different controls that this has in order to enable you to create so many different shapes. We could center these lines. I could push this down to the bottom. We can add some rounding on here and make these little cylinder shapes. We can shrink these down, and now we got these little dot looking shapes. We can increase this a whole bunch and then say that actually I want to view this as just a line. So here's just a line that's traveling on the top. We can say make it a stepped line. We could combine these by duplicating it again and saying, okay, well, here's a bar graph, and then here's a line on top of it. And then we can give it additional offsets. We could, push this up further, push it down not quite as far. But then one of the most fun ones is actually just shifting this to the pie chart. Same information, but now wrapped around in a radial. And then we get settings like how much we want this to spin around. We can give this an inner radius. We could offset it so it's actually pivoting from the outside and pushing in. Inside of the data, we can have this noise-based animation. We could manually type in numbers. Look at this completely different look. Again, it looks kind of cool, so I'll decrease this down. And yeah, look at this completely different looking shape. Under the data, we could have completely static but random, and then you could draw your own custom spline to make the shape. But of course, I spend most of my time using the noise-based one. You can type in the type of noise that you want to be representing. We've got so many settings here for like modifying the data and like reversing the data or sorting the data. of subdividing things, layering these up on top of each other. Again, as with all of these different capsules, you can move inside of your asset browser, search all. We've got examples covering all of them. And let me make this huge, scroll down, and you'll see that right here, there's one of them with a bunch of these layered up on top of each other. Here's another one with them layered. And then this one, looking pretty gorgeous. And you can pop any one of these open. It's got download for a second, pops open the scene file. And here's a bunch of different FUI elements all layered up on top of each other and ultimately creating like a big complex animation doing super crazy things. So much fun to create and layer these up on top of each other. So yeah, that is the FUI graph. Let's close that all down. Delete, and let's go back to just the nodes, shrink it back up again. So yeah, FUI graph, let's move into grid. Double clicking on that one. This is literally the first one that we ever made as sort of an experiment. A nice, simple primitive. This one's actually going to be really valuable combining with an upcoming Rocket Lasso plugin. But for now, here's a nice, simple spline grid. Currently, it's just creating a bunch of lines. So that's one line, 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 combining all the way across. We can change the grids. We can make it more subdivided, less. But what's really cool is we can, let me set this to per step. And what's really cool is I can start increasing these vertical cells. We can actually get a 3-dimensional grid of splines. Dropping this back down to 0. We can also do things like return this as individual segments. So if I add in some gap here, you're going to see that every segment is subdivided. Or we can make it a box, and now we get little boxes making up the grid. And again, we can say there's going to be 3 dimensions to it. Let's make that gap a little bit less. You see just a little bit there, and you see all the crazy ways that this might combine to create additional effects. And I love rendering things as splines, if you can't tell from all the plugins that we make. So yeah, the grid spline is actually pretty powerful as this raw element that you can play around with. So yeah, definitely check that one out. Back to the asset browser, delete out the grid. Ooh, next up is the Interconnect spline. This is like the newest one that we put together, one of the last ones that we made. So let's double click on that one and take a look at. We're going to have to keep this one really short because the video to explain this one was pretty long, but let me show you some of the basics. What the idea of this one is that we can take any bit of geometry, and I'll make a text spline. They've been useful so far, but I'm going to subdivide this a bunch. So let's say that under spline, we are not adaptive, we are subdivided, and I won't worry about the angle. So I'll jump it up to 90. You see, we got a bunch of subdivisions. And then under caps, let's say that it's not tessellated with an n-gon. Instead, we'll do a quad or triangle, or let's see, yeah, that'll work. Let's increase the density. So yeah, fairly evenly subdivided. So what's important here is because Cinema sees this as multiple objects, we have to feed this into a connect. But once we've done that, I can grab this copy of text and drop inside the interconnect and then make a copy of it and drag this away. And what's happening is every single point is connecting to its identical point on the other side. So 0 to 0, 15 to 15, 75 to 75, all getting interconnected. But there's so many additional ways of using this tool. Instead of connecting the text to text, why don't I make a disk shape? And on this disk shape, let's put in, we'll keep that inner radius, but let's subdivide a few extra times, and I'll scoot this way over. Turn that off just so I can see where everything is. And yeah, I'll scoot this over into maybe this position there. And let's drop that inside as well. And now I've got connections from this disk shape onto the text object. Now it's a little overwhelming. So why don't we go back into the interconnect and say, actually, I don't want that many. I'm going to pull back and only return a certain percentage. So we've got very few of them, but they're the early ones. So instead, I'll say, let's shuffle the index. So as I shuffle these, they're getting spread out to be randomly connecting between all those possible points. So now we've got these parametric spline connections between all of those. But let's push it even further. I'll make a copy of the disk shape and let's scoot this up into the air. So now we get from object to object to object, kind of like a loft. But now if I hit T for scale, I can shrink that down. And then under interconnect, we can change tangents and we'll say connect all objects. So we're getting some kind of funky curves right now. I'll just say set this to auto. And now they're smoothly transitioning from one shape to the next. I can scoot this around and now we're getting these lovely curves going from one to the next. I can grab the tangents, increase, get a nice little smooth arc going there. And, manipulate this however we like. Maybe rotate that around. There we go. Get some lovely connections going in between those. Now, I will make a copy of my text object so we can kind of see what we're connecting to. And that's maybe too many connections. Looks like a little too much. So we'll pull back. I had a lot of points there. So now we got those connections going. So with those connections, what if we were to make them look like electricity. Actually, I'm going to immediately jump into another tool. I know I'm trying to do this as separate segments, but we're going to jump all the way and introduce the Pulse Spline modifier, which is right here. And this was actually kind of designed to work with the Interconnect, even though the Pulse Spline came out like a year ago. So let's go and drag that into the scene as well. And this is another spline modifier. So I'll drop it as a child of this spline. And what this will do is automatically create these pulses of animation through a spline setup. And it's doing them all at the same time. But if I were to change this to not be going from 0 to 100%, but instead do subsequent, meaning kind of look at every spline in sequence of each other, suddenly you can see that we're zapping along them all randomly. Back to Pulse Spline, I'm going to say to slow down. I'm going to say it takes 90 frames to do it. And now they go a little bit slower here. And I can say I want to see less overall length. And now we see those randomly get kind of getting jumped around. So now let's take this and combine it with electric. So I'll grab an electric spline, drop that before the pulse. And this time, let's make it another purlin noise. And we'll do very wide distribution here. So those are randomly moving around. Speed them up a little bit. Make another electric spline after that to do this little electrical effect. We don't need to subdivide nearly as much. That's slowing it down. Yeah. So now we get this electrical effect randomly zipping along and interconnecting between these objects. All organic, all free to grab the elements and move them around. I can grab this and stretch it and look at this coherent electrical effect interconnecting between them. So yeah, the interconnect, very powerful. It does actually a lot more than I'm showing here. It's definitely one to go and check out the example files. If I scroll on down, I'll just pop open this example here, and you'll see all of these were made by Interconnect. Lots of crazy things you can do. You can make these bracketing systems. You can make these 3D models like this bird cage. I got DNA strands, spider web looking things, like lots of crazy stuff. And then even beyond that, and I think even cooler, is sort of this effect, but more finalized. So this is just that same idea over and over again. And look at all these different electrical effects you see right here in the viewport, all playing at the same time. And just because it's really fun, I'll zoom on up, scroll down, and find that. And you see there it is animated, kind of tiny, but all these electrical effects looking so cool right there in the viewport. All right. We could spend all day talking about any one of these tools, but we do have a lot more to plow through. So sadly, we will have to move on. And I think that's the extent I'm going to talk about the Pulse Spline modifier, just because that one's a pretty technical tool. Check out the video to see more. Deleting all that out, we've got the IV generator. Now, very important to note, this is currently a Maxon 1 exclusive. I don't know if that will change in the future, but that's what it is. Double clicking on it, there's a little bit of stuff we need to do to prep this one because this one is a complex generator. So I'm going to actually search for the word leaf in the asset browser and search for all. And I need to find this leaf right here. It doesn't have to be that one, but that one's kind of prepped. I'm going to drop that on here. So instead of these flat cards, we're actually going to see these leaves. I will limit this leaf to right here. You see, we've got a selection tag. And I say limit to that selection tag. And now we can see our vines and we can see our leaves. Just for the purposes of seeing everything, I'm going to go under geometry and I'm going to increase the thickness of the vine, make it a little cartoony, but I just want you to be able to very clearly see the vines. Not realistic, but we see them. All right, so look at this lovely vine generator. I also want to note that this actually was not entirely made by Rocket Lasso. We did some tweaks, we added some features, and we designed the interface for it, but this was actually made by the development team inside of Maxon. Let's make it a little more interesting. Move into the asset browser and search for the word house. And let's grab this house. I'll just drop it in here, default position. And let's grab the snapping tool. Grab our ivy, and I want to snap this right there to the corner and turn off snap and probably just scoot it a little bit away. Cool. Okay. Now we've actually got some geometry to play with. So if I were to grab the ivy generator, you will see in the main tab, there's something called surface object. If I drop that house inside of it, suddenly the ivy is clinging onto the surface of the building. So now if I grab ivy, we've got all these really cool settings, and we worked pretty hard on this part. You can actually transition and grow these in. You see the ivy will grow when we get more and more branches. We can keep on increasing the length of this ivy and making it cover more and more of the building. There are quite a few settings here and lots of different styles as far as making it look like really kind of clumped up. We can make it avoid the windows. We could tell it to grow towards a particular direction. You can add gravity. We could add more density. Like right here, we just have a density control. So we can add more and more and more. You see how dense this is starting to get, like all of these crazy leaves. You can colorize these leaves with MoGraph and drive the colors of them. We've got this climbing force. We could say, as I increase this climbing force, it's going to be more and more inclined to try and travel upward. We have it go down that way. We've got this dangling force. There are so many different controls to control this ivy. And you can even clone this and make multiple clones of ivy along the entire thing. So yeah, lots of cool, crazy possibilities of this. You can even swap out the geometry. I think if we drop in just a cube as a child, then it's going to swap out all the leaves as these giant cubes. So let me set this to 5 by 5 by 5. And now there's cubes growing all along this thing. And you can now see the MoGraph cloner colors getting propagated through the entire thing. So you have complete control over the way this looks. There's all these controls for leaves. It is a fun one, and you should definitely go and check it out and watch the entire video on how to use it. Back into the asset browser. Let's go to nodes and clear this out and put Rocket Lasso back in. Okay, we still got more to get through. So plowing on through, here is one of the newest ones. It is the join spline. Double clicking on that, I'm just going to show one of the key examples I think is really cool. If we were to make a very basic spline, let's make an arc, and I'll make another arc. So if we were to grab both these arcs and drop them inside the join spline, it's going to take the second spline and connect the start of it to the end of the previous one. It does a lot more than that, but that basic concept where these are getting welded together as a single spline is actually incredibly powerful, especially for building your own rigs and parametric models. Dropping this into a sweep, holding down Alt and then Shift, I'll put in a rectangle, T for scale, and then I'll hit NB. You can see that, yes, indeed, these are one object now. Now, my favorite little rig to show off when it comes to the join spline is actually making a line object and a second line object. One is on X, the other is on Y. I'll make a cloner and drop them both inside the cloner, and then we'll feed that into a connect object. Now I can drop that connect into the join spline, and you're going to see that it's now taking every other copy and alternating it up to make the staircase. I'll swap the order so that first we go up and then we go over. Select the cloner, and instead of grid, let's go to linear. And now I can just increase the count. And the more I increase the count, the more these steps are building up. And keep in mind, they are actually welded on top of each other. And then after those lines all go, I could make another copy of a line here. And now that's the first line. So I can say, okay, it's going to start out with some flat floor right there. And then I can make another copy of this flat line and say that's going to be after the other one. And we get this long line at the end, all of them getting combined. And then in the join spline, we do things like add some chamfer. So I'll say, yes, turn on some chamfer, increase the radius, and now you see those get rounded out. So yeah, that is the join spline. Again, very powerful. I wish I had that a long time ago for so many parametric rigs I've made over the years. But anyway, back into the asset browser, we've got the partition modifier. I really like this one. I think more people should be playing with it. I'm going to create a basic plane, zoom on up to it, drop the segments to 1, 1, and drop the partition modifier as a child of a piece of geometry. What this is going to do is subdivide that geometry into a bunch of individual polygons, and it even will maintain your UVs on these individual pieces. Now, this does lots of cool stuff. If I hit play, and we go under random animation, I crank this up, we can get this to be automatically animating. We can create as many cuts as we like here, super duper subdividing this. Get rid of that random animation, and just looking at this as a still, we can control things like what I like to do is actually zero everything out. So here's the basics. And now we can say randomize the cuts, and you'll see that these cuts are just offsetting from each other until we get tiny ones and we get big ones. But then more fun, let's get rid of that. We have random density, and that goes to, well, the next cut is going to happen where? So as I increase this, instead of it being on the next logical spot, it's going to randomly choose it more and more. So now we can end up with really big polygons and then really tiny polygons. This tool is really fun for making so many different rigs. I've made entire city generators off of this thing. In fact, there's an example in the asset browser we'll take a peek at. In addition to that, there's a lot of controls. Watch the main video. But if we were to do something like grab this cut orientation and say manual, and I say cut only in one direction, I'm going to go easy on the density. Let's pull back on that. Now I've got a bunch of planks here. I'll say randomize those a little bit. And then I'll make a duplicate of the partition modifier. Are you seeing a theme on a lot of these where you're supposed to layer them up? And now I can grab my orientation and shift it to the other direction. So now we get a bunch of planks going one way, and now I can cut them the other direction, and we get this awesome random floor. So many cool ways of combining these on top of each other. There's another powerful tool. We've even got this skew angle in there, so you can twist these into these different orientations and mess it up even further. So definitely go and check out the Partition Modifier. Deleting that one out, we are getting on the home stretch here. We've got the picture frame. This one, it does what it says on the tin. Again, Max on One exclusive. If I double click on it, we will get a lovely little parametric picture frame generator. Now we've got a height and a width. We've got the overall width here driven by the aspect ratio. We've got a bunch of different picture frame styles that you can play around with. And we're also generating selection tags so you can apply different materials here. So if we go to materials, let's just search for the word wood, and I'll just grab any random one here. I'll apply it. And then let's find this. That's a picture. Here's the frame. So I can say, okay, limit that to the frame. And then we can go and search for the word poster. I thought there was a poster in here. Oh, actually, the poster is under media. So here's like a poster, and I'll just drag that in to be a random material, and we'll apply that, and I'll limit that to be on the picture. And oh, an important thing, when you make a new material, it doesn't show up in the viewport unless you hide the reflection. So now we got that image on there. And then we got things like the matte. So I can increase that. And then you see there's like a nice little matte layer in there. We can apply a material to that. You can apply glass on top of this. And yep, it is a parametric picture frame generator. It does what it says on the tin. Back to the assets browser. Hide that one. Search for Rocket Lasso nodes. Moving on. The Pulse Spline modifier. Already talked about that one. Next up, we have the stair generator. Double clicking on that one. It is, again, making some parametric stairs for you. Clicking on that, you see we get this kind of cool bleacher looking set of stairs. Selecting it, we got a bunch of different parameters here, how many steps you want to have, where you want to pivot from. And then we've got a bunch of controls for controlling all these different attributes for how deep the stairs are, how tall they're going to get, how deep they are, how thick the stairs are. We can add risers to it. So you see it's got this backing plate now. We can change this to different support types. I can say this is a solid set of stairs. We could then get rid of the step thickness, and now we just got those simple ones. We could change this to have no supports, and I just get these floating steps. We've got these wall stringers where you can put these walls on the side of it. Even more fun, I think if we do the settings kind of extreme, yeah, we can push those down, add some extra height, add some thickness there, and you'll make essentially every type of staircase that we could imagine. And you can even use a deformer like a twist or a bend, and you get like a spiral staircase out of them. And it makes all the different selection tags you need for all the different elements of the stairs. So yeah, there is a stair generator. Deleting that one, we can move on into the final three. This one, trim spline modifier. This one, really straightforward. This was an early one that we made. Start out simple. We'll just make a text spline, and we'll apply the trim spline modifier on top of it. What this is going to do is allow you to trim out different parts of the spline, a very simple erasing out of a spline. It is surprisingly hard in Cinema 4D to set up a rig to do that. Now you can just drop this in as a deformer, and you can erase it out from one side, erase it out from the other side, and you can even say erase out part of it, and we can give it a rate here. I'll do like 50%. So we're now traveling half of the amount over the course of a second. And then you got manual offset. We can customize things. This is currently based on the percentage of the spline. We could do it based on absolute lengths here. So we could erase out from one side by an actual unit, in this case, almost 100 centimeters. And yeah, for the most part, that is the trim spline. You can also say per segment. So we can erase out per segment. So we can erase out from both sides of all of these splines. Now, what I might end up doing with this type of thing would be combining it with other tools where maybe we will turn it off for a moment and grab a break spline modifier. And I'll say, okay, now break from the angles. So now we get those corners, and then we could animate a trim coming in from both sides there or from one side. So back to trim, let's zero this out, zero that out, and now we're back to this. And now I can start erasing out from one side. It would be very difficult to do this without these tools. So yeah, trim spline modifier, pretty handy. Moving on, we got another simple spline primitive here. Double clicking on that. It is the wave spline, but it does a couple of different cool things. So we got this parametric wave spline, much like a helix or something like that. But if we hit play and we give this some animation speed, let's give it a period of, let's say, 30 frames. Then you see, let's slow it down, let's say 90 frames. You see we got this wave constantly traveling around. And you see it almost looks like it's getting drawn on the edge there. Looks pretty cool. But we've got a bunch of different patterns. So we can go, say, a cosine. We can do a triangle shape, a sawtooth shape, square, crank, bounce is kind of fun. We can get a random noise. So you kind of get like this hospital meter. We can change the frequency amount. We could change the height. We can change the width. We can change where we're pivoting from. And we've even got this cool spline where you can say, hey, fade it out from one side and grow on the other. Or, let's grow up and then down. Lots of different cool ways of combining this. So, here's a sine wave, but growing up and down. This would not be trivially easy to make otherwise, but the wave spline actually makes it pretty good. So yeah, an intriguing and straightforward tool to play around with. Delete that one out. And we've gotten to the very final of the Rocket Lasso Nodal Capsules that you can find inside of Cinema 4D. And I do like this one a lot. This was a concept that I really fought for, and it's called the Spline Generator. So you double click on this one, and this one needs to be fed some geometry, but it needs to be fed a special type of geometry. It needs to be fed a regular grid. So essentially what that means is this works on a lot of primitives. So a regular grid would be something like a plane where you have a count along right here. It's like 10 along. And you see it's always 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. It's a regular grid. So it can be any size on one and any size on the other, but it's consistently 10, 10, 10 all the way. So let me show you the basics. 55 by 55. And let's feed that into the Spline generator. As soon as I do, suddenly that's gone and it's returned a spline instead. Look at that. So now that we've got that, I can feed this into a sweep, feed into the sweep and end side, shrink that way down. And now we've got this lovely weave pattern going. Now, of course, you can layer everything up. Let's make that a little bit smoother. Inside the weave spline, we can do things like say how tall these peaks should be. We can add an additional layer of subdivision and smoothing so that we'll get a little bit softer. And then we can offset these insets. So I can say like 5 by 5. And I see that we get these edges pulled in. We get these little tassels on the end. There's ways of erasing out sections by using a point selection limiter. We can go to randomize, and I can add in like imperfections on top of the entire thing. So it gets a little bit more messy. And even better is we've got a bunch of different patterns. This is a plain weave, but then we got a twill, and here's hatch. Here's a crowfoot pattern, 8 harness, and a 5 harness pattern, all looking pretty cool. But what's even cooler is that by changing the number of subdivisions, you can dramatically change the way this looks. Grabbing my plane, I can say drop this down to 22, and suddenly we have a very different looking pattern. Maybe this looks more like a wicker basket looking pattern. Now, remember what I said. This needs to work off a regular grid, but many things in cinema are a regular grid. This plane is a regular grid, and we'll come back to it. Turn that off. But what else is a regular grid? Well, a disc shape is a regular grid. You might not think of it that way, but if I increase these numbers, let's see if we give it a little inset there, you can see that that just looks like a plane, but stretched around in a circle. So if I grab that and drop it inside the weave spline, you can see that we can get the pattern from there. By turning on the correct combination of like removing the last closed point and closing the spline, you can close this off, make entire woven baskets from it. So that can be really cool. But also other things that could be regular grids are things like extrudes, things like lofts, things like lathes, things like sweeps. So many different objects and primitives inside a cinema could be a regular grid. So even though it is a regular grid, I don't feel like it's very limiting. Let's go and drop this back in. I want to show you one last thing just because, I don't know, it's fun motion graphics-y stuff. I'm going to grab my end side and say, give it 2 sides, so now it becomes flat. Now, unfortunately, just a thing in splines and cinema, sometimes it doesn't know the orientation. We can make a duplicate of it, but in this case, I think I can just say, hey, sweep, I would like you to not bank. There we go. So you see now these are just kind of overlapping each other nice and flat. T for scale, I'll make them a little bit bigger, so nice and overlapping. And just for cleanliness, let's subdivide by 1 and smooth by 1, so those look even better. And now look at this. Oh, look at that pattern. It looks so good. So now that I've got that, what I'm thinking is let's make a duplicate. And one of these weave splines, I'm going to say only return horizontal. The other one, I'm going to say return only vertical. And now I can grab both of these and say automatic color. And I'll grab one of them and say that you should be pink. And I'll grab the other one and say you should be blue. Make a darker blue. Actually, I'm trying not to blow our eyeballs out here. That's kind of okay. So yeah, now we've got this interwoven pattern here, which is looking very, very nice. But then we got to go one step further. Let's go Control D, simulation, and under scene, we've got gravity of 0. And then on both of these, on the geometry, keep in mind, you could do this on the splines as rope, but I'm going to right click on the sweeps and I'm going to say, not bullet, we're going to do simulation cloth. So a cloth simulation, no gravity. And I'm going to say you're very bendy and you've got a lot of friction. And then I'll make a simulate forces turbulence. And I'm just guessing at numbers here. I'm going to make it pretty strong and make that pretty big. And now we've got, hit play, give it a second, and look at that. We have now got animated cloth. And this is not running on the spline. It's running on the actual ribbons. This entire pattern is now animating. It's got friction. It's actually tangled up with itself. You can see these pieces at the end are kind of unraveling because they're just kind of stuck there on those edges. This whole thing drifting through space. Look how easy it was for me to put that together. Like, so much fun. Like, I really want to see more people playing around with this. There's so many cool motion graphics opportunities to play around with this type of thing, being able to create these grids so trivially. Let's go back just for fun. I don't know if this will work. I'm totally winging it, but let's just change it to a different pattern. Yeah, different pattern here. Let's this time say that there is almost no friction. So they're kind of free to slide off of each other. And so we got a different pattern, no friction, same turbulence. And now you see that they're starting to unravel from the edges more, the whole thing drifting a little bit more because we don't have so much friction. And just so cool. There's like so many different possibilities here. So kind of fun to end on this very flashy looking one. So moving back to the asset browser, that is now a quick overview of all of the different Rocket Lasso nodal-based capsules that are inside of Cinema 4D, and then distinguishing them from the Rocket Lasso plugins for Cinema 4D, the tools that we actually make and sell directly to artists based on feedback from artists. And we very much appreciate everybody who supports Rocket Lasso, both through Patreon, but especially for those who pick up our tools and make cool looking stuff with it. Make your clients happy with these tools, make your workflow faster and more powerful with these tools. But that's going to wrap this one up. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching and for supporting, for liking and subscribing, all that good stuff that you're supposed to do. But anyway, I'll wrap this one up and I'll see you in the next tutorial, live stream, presentation, or who knows, maybe product launch. Bye-bye, everybody.